Good morning, GEOINT. Wow. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me. I didn't really expect this big of a crowd Sunday morning, but I'm flattered. And I also want to thank everybody that's here. This is an ecosystem. And without you, we would not be able to do the incredible things that we do on a daily basis in defense of this great nation. And so I think that partly what I'm going to talk about is that ecosystem and how I think we need to invite more people in, because the borders are expanding in terms of technology. And I think that's one of our big challenges as an ecosystem, is to leverage all of that on behalf of the nation. So hopefully I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then take questions. I hope to spark more debate and more questions than I actually provide any new information. And that's part of being Q. But we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to show you a bunch of things that you probably already know, but I think it's worth looking at data. I'm a data person. So you can see US total R&D expenditures. This is current data. If you can't read the bottom there, the green line is business. The gold line is the government. And mostly, the green line is not the typical supply chain to the USG. They are if you think about licenses or buying services, but not if you think about kind of classically our contracts and acquisition technology, the way we acquire technology, right? So that should be our first sort of serious look at whether or not we've invited all the partners in that need to be part of this conversation. All right, so this next one talks about where the US goes in terms of other countries. And there's the one that is, let's see, high and to the left, shows the current trends as measured through 2015. The one that's lower and to the right shows a crossover point. Can people see where that crossover point is? It's about halfway through this year. And that is with China. So this idea that innovation and R&D is ours by birthright, which we have lived on for years and years and years, is perhaps not an assumption that we should continue with. And that's why I love showing data, is because we're all engineers and scientists. We love solving problems and challenges. I would say this is a challenge. It might be off in terms of the 2018 crossover point, but the trends clearly, the current trends, which is what the one chart shows, clearly illustrate that those curves are converging, and they will cross unless we do something different. All right, so I'm going to go through some basics here that most of you probably have seen, and then propose some things, because I also don't like to just point out problems and not do something about it. I actually, for those of you that know me and have been in my office, I keep a barrel of monkeys on my table. And the symbolism there, one of my staff got it for me, is don't pass me your monkey. I will admire the monkey with you, but I don't want to feed that monkey. I don't want to take care of that monkey. That's your monkey, and I expect you to take it on. So I'm going to hopefully start a conversation about how we address that monkey. Everybody's familiar, hopefully, with the Gartner hype cycle. I'm just going to point out some technologies, because my director asks me on a regular basis, so what are your worry beads, Dawn? And I have actually about 8. Some are more worrisome than others. I'm going to start with an obvious one. How many think that we're still leading the globe in 5G? Darn, I wish there were at least some hands. Now, is it because you're tired? Okay, good. And on what, oh, I won't pick on you. I was going to say, and on what basis do you believe that? I'll just say that I've watched this, I'll say, for the last decade. And if we are, it's because we're playing checkers, because we do whack-a-mole. We sometimes invoke CFIUS, we sometimes do things with export controls, but generally, we don't have a consistent strategy across all of government. I'm not just talking the IC or DoD at this point, right? What we've discovered, and we all know this, but economic viability is inextricably intertwined with national security. So the Chinese publish, and I'm not a big proponent of 5-year plans, but they've been very overt about we need to own next generation wireless, next generation compute, big data, and artificial intelligence. And they are moving systematically out against that. So I think they're playing chess, or at least 3D checkers, and we're playing 2D checkers. And I've watched us slowly erode over time our leadership in next generation wireless. And I won't debate whether or not it's crossed over. But can we all agree that we have eroded the leadership? Can we all agree that we've eroded our leadership in space? It's those kinds of things that I think we have to think fundamentally differently about, and who we partner with in order to do something about those curves that I showed. So my list, I'll just read it. There's nothing special about it, but hopefully it'll spark, again, some conversation. Space is one. Synthetic biology is another one. And there's actually some good news there, which I'll get to close to the end. Identity intelligence. If you think about what it is that we do as an organization, being able to operate and execute at will is a big part of what we rely on in order to conduct our operations. So if you think about pervasive CCTV coverage, if you think about pervasive wireless with relatively small cells, even if you turn your phone off on your way to your place of employment 10 minutes before you get there, do you think anybody's fooled about where you work? And if you forget once, not that that ever happens, you've probably blown it, right? So I ask our folks all the time, if you have supposedly a 6-figure, high 7-figure, or low 7-figure income, and you own no real estate, you don't have any health insurance, like big life insurance policies to speak of, and you turn your cell phone off every day from 8 to 5, who do you work for? And why would somebody ask that question? Oh, let's see, insurance salesmen would ask that question. Real estate agents would ask that question. So this is not something that takes a sophisticated adversary who does human for a living to construct. Those are very typical questions, because what they want to do is they want to sell you something. So if you combine that with the coverage that's now pervasive in many of the large cities around the globe, what does that say about our ability to operate? Now, the good news is, if you're playing offense, this is a really fun game, right? But at the end of the day, and we believe this to our very core, this is about people on people, and you can't do it all virtually. And think about that. If you need a commitment from somebody to do something that is antithetical to what they've been taught from the time they were born, you got to be able to look them in the eye and explain why this matters. And you've got to have a basis for relationship. And generally, you can't get that strictly through virtuals. And there's lots of organizational behavior research that says if you really want those deep commitments, it's people to people, face to face. Now, if you're doing virtual ops, that's a great thing as well, right? But it's a different kind of information that we're going to get than people on people. And so this identity intelligence piece is really, really critical to go forward. Next generation tradecraft, which is part and parcel of those things, right? Smart cities, industrial Internet of Things, the advertising markets, all of those things say we're going to have to actually live our cover. It's not going to be you can change personas at the border. How many of you gone through a border recently? Okay? Did they take your picture? Did they fingerprint you? Now, if you're on a dip passport, they're not supposed to do these things, right? But not everybody gets to do that. So how long do you think it's going to take? Now, you can count on bureaucracies not working, right, but being slow. But in 10 years, do you want to bet your life that they can't figure out who you actually are if you're about to go in and do an operation? So we're going to have to live our cover in a whole different way. Your cover is going to be your life, and you're going to find moments where you can do things, right? And when I'm watching a movie with my family in a theater, I might be connected, but I'm not responding. If I'm sitting in a dentist chair, I might be connected, but I'm not responding. So I'm going to submit that there are lots of opportunities to do things where you're not responding. So this is not, this is not the end of GEOINT as we know it. It's a big difference, though. And think about, and this is the challenge, how do we allow those things to happen? What kind of overwatch do we need? So if you treat a case officer as an airframe, how do we keep our most precious airframes protected? Think about the overwatch that we provide to make sure that a penetrating fighter can get, or a bomber can get in. And now we've got to scale that to case officers. The good news is those are great problems to have from a technology standpoint, right? The bad news is we got a lot of work to do. I talked about 5G and next generation wireless already, right? Next generation compute. How long has China had the fastest computer in the planet? For about a decade now. Now, hopefully, in the next couple of months, there'll be a new announcement that changes that, right? But they are right there. We talked a lot, and you're going to talk a lot about AI and machine learning going forward and how important that is. We got to get on this, folks, and we got to get the data tagged with open tagging systems that we can use. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to help us mensurate. There are going to be different standards there. But we have our rules of engagement. We have our standards of civility. And people like this crowd are what make that possible. So I don't want to compromise what it means to be American. At the same time, we've got to leverage the things that are coming at us commercially and do only the things that we can do uniquely. And those are really important. And we got to get on it. And for everybody that keeps their hand on one world while the rest of the world is changing, that could be drag. And that's what we've got to grapple with. So those are my 8 that I just went through. What does that also say? This is a big initiative for us. We are training our teams on business acumen, which is not acquisition and procurement. We know how to do those things. We make mistakes, but we know how to do those. But we've got to invite in, and I'm going to use some company names here, not because I want you to go say, oh, the big dark CIA is doing something with these folks, but just as examples to pique your interest, right? How many conversations are we having with GE Ventures or Intel Ventures or pick your favorite? How about Parsons? How about Marriott? What could those folks teach us, or how could we leverage them in a non-spooky way to do the things that we need to do? Are we even having those conversations? Should we be? Because they're a big part of that curve I just showed you. Okay. These you've seen. Moore's Law, people say it's running out. We do a lot of work. And again, I'm going to use company names here and don't run to the dark corners and say, oh, there's something they're doing there, because it's not the case. We do a lot of work with NVIDIA and others because that's the way we're doing computation, right? So I don't expect this to run out. It's going to keep going, which just means that we need to be able to be that flexible, that agile, that we can leverage that. Internet of Things, there's lots of noise about this, but there's a Chinese company that is giving away low-end compute for Internet of Things with dev kits because they understand the importance of this market. And I just talked about the implications of this for us in terms of our ability to prosecute our missions, right? Big data analytics, you're going to, again, this underpins, this is like minimum bid in order to be able to do real machine learning. You've got to tag the data, you've got to run analytics on it, and then you can provide machine learning on top of that. And I'll talk a little bit about, maybe I'll do it here. So one of the things we've done, I've been quoted as saying we have 137 AI projects at the agency. That's at last count. It's probably 6 months old now. There's a lot in this space that is snake oil. So I don't think it's time to throttle back. I think it's time for us to get better about sharing information across the enterprise about what we're seeing that is advanced analytics versus machine learning. And we need to be able to call each other, and we need to be able to exchange information on this, right? Because this is what this analytics and then the machine learning piece is the big promise. But we've got to be able to sort wheat from chaff. So for those of you that are in sales, please don't oversell to our leadership, because all you do is then make it harder for the rest of us to actually say, well, not so fast. But I'll give an example, right? We are seeing in about 30 countries that we're no longer followed when we leave our place of employ, because the coverage is good enough that they don't need to. Between CCTVs and wireless infrastructures. So what we did was we put together a small team. We did it as an innovation challenge, kind of something we might do with a GeoWorks. So hopefully not stealing your thunder, but that's the kind of programs we're going to do. And we took a bunch of unclassified overhead and unclassified street view, and between an AI and having people actually gamify identifying the locations of cameras, we actually put together a map of cameras in one of the big capitals that we don't have easy access to, right? And it also included what kind of cameras they were, which direction they were looking, if they weren't the 360s, so that our folks might have some shot, also using AI, to plan a surveillance detection route. So does this stuff matter? Absolutely. And we had to do this the hard way because there's nothing out there right now. So we brute forced it. They tagged a whole bunch of data, and the machine learning actually got better as we went. So we took something that took 16 years and computed it in 7 days. That's a much better use of our analyst time. And we've got something that is relatively current for our case officers to use. That's the first step in this much longer journey of, I have this vision of actually the smartwatch that basically is like buzzing away at our case officer saying, you're good, you're good, you're good, oop, you're getting yellow, and maybe there's a wave off, but maybe it's like, no, you can actually go to this meet, right? That's a cop at the individual level, near real time. Think how hard it is to do a cop for the handful of platforms that we need to provide it for today. That's our future. The good news is the technology exists. The bad news is we're on the wrong end of the curve. But that's an example of what you can get with data tagging. So there's a couple of examples here. You're familiar with them. For those of you that aren't taking advantage of these, I'd encourage you to look at them, or at least think about how we engage with industry at different points in there, because for those of you that are uncomfortable with this, well, we've got a couple of venues set up. You've got a couple of more that are going to be discussed in the next few days. Think about solving the problem as many ways as possible, as opposed to going to, and I love our current suppliers. This is not about that, right? This is about leveraging those curves that you saw. And our current suppliers that are here in the audience, you're sitting on a bunch of IP that is really great stuff that you're waiting for us to have the cash to bring to operations. If it's something that could be commoditized from a business perspective, then let's have those conversations. And I mean that sincerely. Because if you think about where we were with mapping a decade ago, and Google Maps and Google Earth, this team has helped commoditize mapping for the planet. But nobody's going to do it to mensurate. But most of the R&D costs, we moved off to commercial. Brilliant. Exactly the right model. And so I'm encouraging you to think about, and that's what I think about in my 8, how do we leverage the R&D that's already being done, and in many cases by companies who don't think about us as one of their primary users, and help them get where they need to be and help us get where we need to be. But there's a couple here I'm going to talk about, because if that freaks you out too far, you say, oh, my boss will never go for it. I'm going to guess that they're going to let you work with IARPA or InQtel, and that would be a good first step for everybody, right? or GeoWorks, or SVIO, or fill in the blank, DIUX, whatever it is, right? Engage. This is about engaging. So IARPA does grant-based partnering. It basically does, I'm going to be a little businessy right now, but round A and B, a little bit of seed funding through their various vehicles. Generally, the way we do this is we get observer seats on boards, and we have about a 30% transition rate of startups into various parts of the community. For those of you that know anything about venture, generally that's a 10% on their best day success rate. So we're doing better than average, and the reason I would submit is because we think about the future so much, even within the confines of our current acquisition strategy, we are really good partners to inform where industry is going to go or where new industries can emerge. And that's one of the strengths that we bring to these conversations, because people say to me, well, we don't have that, relatively, you just showed us we don't have that much money. Relative to that, we don't have much leverage. Wrong. The intellectual capabilities that we bring to these conversations that is resident in this crowd today creates markets. That's the story of Keyhole to Google Map. Don't underestimate that. I do spooky things on behalf of the agency. I do recruit on behalf of the agency. I will tell you that when I walk into a CEO's office and talk about the things that we've done and say, any IP we co-develop is yours, I'm halfway home. Because they recognize the value of this ecosystem. The other thing that's great about us is we always pay our bills. So if you're a startup, no, seriously, and you have fixed costs you need to cover, we're a terrible first customer, but we're a great second customer, because the first customer will make you do push-ups till you puke and will break your system. Sorry, that's acquisition slang. Will break your system getting qualified to meet the acquisition standards. But once you've got a bit of a track record, we always pay our bills. So now we can cover with our licensing fees or our service fees, whatever, your fixed costs, so you're not worried about so much about your next round. So we bring IP and we bring stability in terms of funding. If you're a startup, that is an awesome deal, right? So I'm not going to go through these. You can look at their website. If you're interested, if you do business development, these two websites you should check out, because it clearly indicates where we're interested in making investments, because we list them. So if your boss is saying, what's the IC interested in? We aggregate these things on behalf of the community. I mean, these organizations do, right? It's a great first cut at where we're going to be making investments. And then people understand In-Q-Tel in terms of the venture-based partnering. Again, a long list here that I'm not going to go through that works quite well. And the various labs that we have, if you're not familiar with that, this is, again, another opportunity where we post challenge problems, and we invite people in. And again, you bring your IP, you can protect it however you want while you're there. Engineers together, as you all know, go to the whiteboard and solve problems, and you depart with clean IP. So I would say the data analytics piece, Lab 41, is the kind of basis for how you get to that minimum acceptable standard. You've got tag data that you're willing to share. And then we have pillars on top of that. One is cyber, one is space, and thank you, NJ, for being a partner in that. And one is synthetic biology. Lots of applications for these things, but those are the three that we have going through In-Q-Tel. And then we partner with you all, and we're looking forward to partnering on GeoWorks and other things for the classified problem sets that we need to do inside of the wall. But we want to be very clear on those are the only places that's going to be done, because a business will not emerge of its own for that particular expertise. So this is my wrap-up slide. We still do some basic science, but I'll tell you the agency doesn't. It's all about applied. And that basic science is being done mostly in academia and mostly by commercial entities, right? What we are is great lead users, and there's a great book if you haven't read Eric von Hippel's stuff. It's actually metrics-based work. It's not romantic vignettes. It's actually, he's done a number of studies that explain what a lead user is and what their value is. Basically, a lead user can see the future and is worth 1,000 times every other user. And you know these people, right? They're the person that says, you know, if I could touch my cell phone, instead of trying to figure out how to do the A 3 times, or 0 3 times to get to, you know, W, that might be a little more efficient. Seems obvious in the rearview mirror, but not so much. I mean, if I had asked people 20 years ago, do you need to touch the surface of your cell phone, they would have been like, no, I just smear it up and I can't read it at that point, right? Now we wouldn't dream of walking around with something like that. Well, some of you still do, but we can talk later. We're great lead users. And the cell phone, the touch technology, were investments out of the IC. Relational databases, investments out of the IC. Mapping, location services, investments out of the IC. You can point to market after market after market where the people in this room, our predecessors, did exactly what I'm proposing that we think about much more overtly today. And I think that is our responsibility, but also our opportunity. And then I said early adopters, right? Making sure that a startup or a fledgling business in a large corporation has a user base and a revenue stream associated with that that keeps them interested and hungry is an incredibly important role to have. So if you're not comfortable with that, you say, I'm not a lead user, I don't see around corners like that. That's okay. You can be an early adopter and provide a startup revenue line, the revenue that they need in order to stay interested and engaged with our problem set and help drive where they need to go so that they stay relevant for our problem set. All of those very important roles, and everybody in this room has a role to play in that. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there are questions or comments. Either I put you to sleep or...
I think definitely did not put us to sleep. In fact, what I'd really like to do is kick everybody out of the room, and you and I can just sit down and have a whole conversation about this. You know, they warned me to kind of come up with my own questions in case nobody did, but of course everybody did. But I want to just ask a couple. So of course you mentioned next generation compute, and of course as the IBM guy, we're delivering Coral obviously to DOE. So that's the hope to leapfrog. But where do you see quantum coming in on that? Because that's obviously another step, and obviously that's another race that we're very much engaged in, both between the United States and China.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think quantum, potentially, I mean, it's still a work in process in my estimation. Quantum has a role, for sure, but it's not the be-all, end-all, right? It solves a very specific set of problems, which are good problems to solve, and gives us opportunities as well. But that's one piece, right? And I don't think GPUs are the be-all, end-all either. I mean, it's like we've got to keep ahead.
It's all the components that need to be woven together.
That's right. And if you think about what Google and others, Amazon and others are doing, they are building their own compute that is optimized for their particular problem set, right?
Right.
So we've got to be able to play. And this is why I'm so passionate about understanding what industry's doing and leveraging it, because we don't have different problems than everybody else. We just apply them to different, or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We don't have different technology needs than everybody else. We have different problem sets that technology will apply to.
Well, right? And let me just leverage off of that one, because you hit on what I think is an absolute critical issue, whether we're talking about on-prem compute or cloud computing or even out into different AIs. All of these things are purpose-built based on what the builder needs it to do, whether that's Amazon or Google or Microsoft or IBM or NVIDIA. And I think a critical component for the government is A, to understand that.
Yes. And
then B, look at what is my problem and how does that match up against that litany of capabilities. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the other piece is, and how do I motivate somebody who might not otherwise be typical to me to want to collaborate on that, right? And that's the business piece that we're trying to bring to our folks. So So we recruit, not in an evil sense, but in a healthy partnership kind of sense, right? So absolutely, and I think that the only thing that I would add to that is all of these initiatives, at the heart of them, are platform-based, right? But what we're seeing is a lot more distribution in terms of those platform definitions. So they are optimized to particular problem sets, right? But I don't want to mistake that this is not back to we design things down to the silicon. I don't think that's our job. This is, we understand the product lines, for example, I'll pick on IBM, that they are putting together because IBM's a platform company, right? And we understand which problem sets they envision those applying to. We figure that out, and then we motivate whatever the appropriate partnership is, right, to be either a lead user or an early adopter and bring it to bear on our problem sets. And we have to do it at speed. We cannot be trying to reverse engineer on 18-month time cycles the things that these folks are going to spend literally hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on, right? We've got to be in with them, figuring out having these conversations so that we can be on the thing as it comes out, not a generation behind continuously.
So given that that's the goal, and the key is getting that exchange going with industry, what are you doing on your side to drive your agency's employees to get out there, and not just get out there anecdotally, but to do it at scale? Because that's what we need to do. If we're going to leverage that skyrocketing commercial spend curve, it can't just be ones and twos.
Right.
We need to get hundreds of people and hundreds of engagements and public partnerships going, even beyond an IARPA pilot or challenge.
Yep, absolutely. So, so we're very early in the days here, but I actually just approved a business, I'll call it a business acumen curriculum, so that we actually teach our people, and I won't ask for a show of hands. Most of our folks, for a variety of reasons, can't read balance sheets. Yes, I hope that was an industry person that was laughing. And I look at them and say, so who's responsible for your retirement? If you can't read a balance sheet, to me, that's a basic life skill, right? Or you're abrogating your retirement to somebody else that does this for a living. And guess what? We're mathematicians and scientists and engineers. We can all do math, and this is not advanced math, right? Multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. We're not talking about, doing any sort of integration functions here, right? Not at least at the first order. Our folks don't even have that vocabulary, and every time I hear somebody say private industry in the government, I just want to cringe, because that's like everybody else. Well, what motivates Google and what motivates Lockheed Martin? Completely different things, right? And there's a difference between a venture capital and an enterprise investor. And we don't have any of that vocabulary, right? So that's a first thing. And so we're starting that with our EODs, our entry on duty, our new hires, but we're also educating folks that look like me, that are kind of in my class group, because lots of them have grown up thinking somebody else is going to do this for them, right? So that's a first step, because we have to learn the vocabulary. We can't teach them our language, we have to learn theirs, right, and what motivates. And then the second thing that we're doing is we just started an externship program. I would love, so this is Dawn pontificating now, this is not an official agency position, but I'm talking about inside. I would love to have 25% of our workforce in externships at any one time. No harm, no foul, a year or so in industry, no golden handcuffs, because that's a negative. You may not get the best people out for that. If they go and we're good about it and we have the attitude that you're going to live your cover, maybe that's a great thing, right? For example. And then if they want to come back and they plan to come back, that's also a great thing, because now they've got that acumen. Now they understand very, very clearly. And oh, by the way, I don't want to stick them in the government services group. I want to have them in global sales, right? Or in an engineering development team, or in a product development team, or whatever, right? We've got to engage with that supply chain where they live. And so that'll take a little while. We're doing baby steps on that now. But that also says that our already hard FTE billet problems I'm going to exacerbate those. I say bring it.
And I know the Jared Kushner, Chris Liddell from the White House are very much pushing that same level of exchange, and I think a lot of us have been in active dialogue. So I think there is a lot of interest from the industry perspective as well, and I couldn't agree with you more. I don't want those folks coming into my federal space. I want them to go into financial services and distribution and healthcare and see what can happen there. Let's jump to AI and have a couple. I've got like 12 questions on that one. But you mentioned it, and a couple others. 1 in 30 companies doing AI aren't really doing AI. There's a lot of snake oil there.
I think it's
There's
more
a
like
lot
29 out of 30, but that's
smoke and mirrors. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's what is AI? Even at IBM, we call it augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. How do you differentiate? Where do you see that going? How mature do you think it's come, just say in the last 5 years or so?
So I think, and I say this, the tech industry plays kiddie soccer, just like everybody else, right? There's a new buzzword, and that's the thing that you've got to put your brand around or you don't get it, right? Yes, our data with InQtel and others shows that about 29 out of 30 companies are doing advanced analytics and not actually applying artificial intelligence. And I don't really want to get into a debate about, pick your favorite definition of what artificial intelligence is. I think I like your augmented. I think that's a really interesting idea because I think that's mostly what people are talking about today. I would submit that the example that I used was no kidding machine learning, right? The machine has gotten much smarter. We did a whole bunch of staff, probably 100 staff years in order to tag the data that we needed in order to do that, because that's a big piece of that. I think the opportunity, right, there's lots of things that we need in terms of making artificial or augmented intelligence a reality. One is to actually make the information that led to the conclusion available, right? When you're briefing the president, Robert knows this well, you're not going to go say, hey, I have high confidence of this based on one data point. And so when a black box spits something out and we can't actually explain how it got to that conclusion, right, that would be irresponsible, right? And it's going to happen because health services, legal services, all of those, they're going to end up in litigation. I know that's shocking, right? But you're going to you can't point at the black box and say, well, I've got a validated black box that tells me that this is the legal precedent that I could rely on in order to make sure that I was good from arguing a case. I think that's like a basic kind of entry level, and I see that happening in financial markets and other places.
Right, the data provenance has to be there when it comes back with that.
I think the opportunity for people like me and our organization is when we get there, now I can make better informed decisions about what collections I need to invest in order to change the confidence level of an assessment, right? So if we have and we have rigorous rules about this, if we have low confidence and you talk to the best analyst, which I will submit is the lead user that everybody says, oh yeah, them, they're that's the lead user for us, and say, what would it take, what would you need to see to change the confidence level from low to medium and then medium to high? That tells me as a collector what it is that I need to go invest in. So there's huge opportunity for me there by closing the loop, right? To say, okay, I can turn down the gain on this investment and I need to turn this one up, right? And aggregate that across the problem set. Now, what I'll probably say is we need more of everything, and I get that. But it would feel a little better as opposed to, well, here's how I feel and, in this budget cycle, right? So I think there are huge opportunities. I also think from a security and scalability standpoint, we're going to force the industry to think about that in ways they never would. And again, an opportunity for us to be lead users and good early partners in terms of informing how this market grows and emerges over time.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with any more. I mean, obviously the data provenance is key. The other key piece, though, within artificial intelligence that we see is bias. It's machine learning, right? So we are teaching the machine, and as we teach the machine, we get our bias. I mean, there's the very famous internet chatbot that became a Holocaust-denying racist in 24 hours. I mean, kind of funny that people decided, let's see if we can do this, but very telling that they were able to do that and drive it. So could you comment on the bias component?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And every time somebody says they're automating their HR processes with machine learning, I do the same thing, right?
Yeah,
so we have a huge initiative to address unconscious bias, and then we have human beings actually doing the work. So I think this is back to the evidentiary piece. I think the opportunity is you can actually expose that bias by making it explicit, right? And the example that we use all the time is you don't think about your breathing or your heart system, right? And when you touch a stove or something hot, there's no conscious part of you that says, oh, got to move my hand, right? You'd end up burned or dead if you had to think about your breathing. But by making these things explicit, now we can then say, okay, we have this bias going on, and we can have other people look at it, right? Which is, for good peer reviews, good design scrubs, that's exactly what you do, right? I might have, and I remember this very well, as a young engineer doing telemetry processing, I didn't know all the things that could go wrong. My control loop was great, but what I got when I got my first red team when I was at JPL was the benefit of 5 folks who had spent 30 years doing telemetry, and they saved me a lot of years and probably heartache by saying, so let me tell you what could go wrong, right? And it was unconscious bias on my part. I thought, a von Neumann machine only had 0 and 1 states, and I had thought through all of them, right? And then they came in with so let me tell you a romantic vignette about this spacecraft or this launch experience, right?
But that's where I think there's so much potential for machine learning. We used to call it knowledge management, and that was your SharePoint site with PowerPoint and all that. But now you actually have the ability to take those 5 experts' minds and bring it down into the machine. I mean, tremendously
And expose
powerful.
it, because they have biases too.
Right, of course.
But if you can get kind of the union of all of that and then pick what we agree, now I think you've got a very powerful tool.
So one in our audience actually typed up questions, and so
wow.
They went to that effort. I have to pull these up. Clearly very, very well prepared. Of the 100 AI projects you mentioned, what percentage of them are using blockchain technology, which of course IBM's into, so I got to ask that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know this statistically, so I'll just caveat it by that, but my sense is about 1/3 that we're making heavy use of the technology for a variety of applications. And I won't go into those here. You use your imagination, you're all smart people. But yeah, a lot of interest in blockchain.
But to your point made earlier, you, the agency, can take what industry is doing with blockchain and taking that from a technology perspective. I mean, we're getting together with Maersk Shipping, so largest shipping company in the world, and developing a shipping platform, and that's going to completely disrupt international shipping. 11 million containers going around the world, and you're taking something that's largely a paperwork drill into the digital world, and that's geospatial.
Yep.
And it's temporal, it's activity-based intelligence, all those pieces coming in together.
And I love your example, because I don't think, we think about it for mission applications, but I think we are not even scratching the surface on back office, logistics support, all of those things, which is all mission, right? There's no part of the machine that is not inextricably tied to our ability to prosecute national security requirements, right? And I love that you use that example. That's why I asked about Parsons, for example, right?
Right. So I have to touch on the identity and intelligence piece, because that's one of my favorite examples. I mean, those of us who grow up with James Bond, right? He would walk in the door with a business card, global imports, and there you were. You were good. You had cover, and you were off and running. And of course, as you said, now with IoT and smart cities and everything being connected, that's
your car is a repeater.
It is, and it's only going to get worse. Do you see, I mean, how do you get ahead of that? And obviously there's an AI component to that as well, as you said, as a warning. I mean, it seems to me almost impossible, unless you head down that route of the public-private partnerships and embedding your people in companies.
I think that's a part of it, but I also think that we'll do a lot more for non-officially covered officers, honestly, that you will literally be living your cover. And there will be those opportunities where you went to see a movie with your family, or at least that's what all of your digital dust indicates, and maybe that's not actually where you physically are, but it'll look like your normal pattern of life, because in fact it is your normal pattern of life. And that's a huge sea change, and informing that means that you actually know what your normal pattern of life looks like to advertising agencies and smart cities and all of that stuff, right? Yeah. So that's what I said about, if you think about what it takes to do, a handful of platforms today, think about scaling that to the officers that actually do things like GEOINT or need to be able to travel clandestinely in the future, right?
And
everybody's going to need that.
And as you said, the threat is not only the Foreign Intelligence Service, it's the bank, it's the insurance company, it's everyone else who's tracking you, and we're spending all that money to go do it. So we're going to be all over you like nobody's business, and all the foreign intelligence.
Because you want to sell me a Baskin-Robbins ice cream if that's my weakness, right?
Exactly.
For a bunch of reasons, exactly.
So I think we've got time for one last real quick question. So back to the gent who came very, very well prepared. As a startup, how best to get your capabilities in front of CIA?
So I would say that our CTO, Dr. Ray Cook, he's not going to be here, I don't think, this week, but he would be an entree point. I'm Dawn CM, DAWNCM at ucia.gov. If you send me a note, it might be a little slow, but I do actually answer all of my email eventually to hook you up with the right place. In-Q-Tel, obviously, would be one place to have that conversation, but invite you. We'll get you inside the right part of the agency in order to have that conversation.
Dawn, thank you so much. Great talk.